morning, everybody. I'm Brent.
I'm Bo.
And this is Rough and Tumble Joy. We're continuing our walk through the book of Philippians. Thanks to those of you who have been watching. Please like and share if you think anything that we have to say today is worth anybody else knowing.
Yeah, I'm trying to look more tough since I've been wearing my button down.
That's very impressive. I got that going on.
And a jacket hides a multitude of sins. Because that quarantine 15 setting in.
Man, that's a tough thing about the spring, isn't it?
Yeah.
You got a lot of stuff in the closet that doesn't.
You got to figure out what you're going to do. It's going to be 80 in the evening, but it's 60 now. So
it's a true story, right? Well, we're rocking along here, continuing in Philippians. Such good stuff we've covered already about Paul's life and about the things he had been through that kind of led into this place where he's able to speak to us about joy. And today we're going to pick up in verse 12.
That's right. He takes a turn. So he's just been thanking them for all that they've done, and then now he starts to identify and start to share a little bit of his personal details of what's going on with him. So he's thought about them. Now he's going to share about what's going on with them. So we can jump in. You want to...
That's great. Well, it begins with this thing that we're all feeling right now, right? And I want you to know, my dear brothers and sisters, this idea of family, right, within the church. And, of course, we talked about the relational thing yesterday, but he progresses it from just a koinonia, this fellowship, to it's even more than that. It's family. We're like brothers and sisters in the church. And I think right now we feel a lot of that relational connection as a church family, the stress we're under and the difficulties that we're facing. And, there's something about that pulls us together and we feel tighter as a result.
Yeah, it's a deeper partnership. It's this bond that is going deeper than just surface level interests and common life events. It is a spiritual depth based on the gospel and their connection to Jesus Christ and their connection in suffering.
And suffering, that's for sure it. And he goes on to say that everything that's happened to me here has helped to spread the good news. And what jumps out of that for you?
Well, what's fascinating to me, because I've been trying to look at this, is this feels a little Stephen Mackey-ish, and I'm going to point out why. So, Stephen, if you're out there, I need you to help me out, because what Paul says here, and yours says to help spread the good news, right? Mine says to advance the gospel. That the words that he's about to use are chains, hindered, advance is the opposite, and in the Greek there's only one letter difference. So it's kind of like
thing going on, kind of.
Yeah, it's kind of like Stephen. It's kind of like he's turned my ball and chain into my call and gain. Like he is
nice.
Changing one little letter.
Wow, Bo, that's impressive.
I've been thinking about this a lot. He's changed my bondage into a bandage to help me, right? He's turned my isolation into transformation. And so, don't you think of Stephen?
That's very impressive.
Or Tony Evans, or I don't know. Just he's using these little words here. You can kind of feel the energy and the fun he's having as he's writing this to show it looks bad, but there is opportunity in the midst.
Yeah, and there's this thing about him just being so sold out to the mission of Jesus Christ. Like everything's about that. And so he jumps into this and just wants to know, okay, this situation we're in is rough, but the gospel's being advanced and God's using it for good. And so it's okay because there is some sense that you feel in this. Paul tells us in other places that his goal, right, is to honor God, to get to the finish line, to hear the Lord say, well done, my good and faithful servant. This whole idea is throughout Paul's writings that he wants to get to this thing and he wants to earn that prize. And so there's nothing about his imprisonment that is keeping him from continuing to pursue his goal. So there's nothing discouraging or maybe as overwhelmingly discouraging about his situation because he's still able to do the thing that he's most passionate about, that's proclaim the gospel.
Yeah, but this, like you said, despite that, he's not being held back. He actually says in the next verse, in verse 13, so that it has become known throughout the whole imperial guard that to all the rest of my imprisonment is for Christ. So he's saying, you might think I'm hindered, but actually I'm using this as an opportunity to advance the gospel with the entire imperial guard. This 9,000 elite troops who protected Caesar and the senators. But I've also been studying this a little bit.
Yeah,
so,
you ready to jump into this?
Yeah.
The Praetorian Guard.
Yeah, I don't get to talk history with a lot of people.
This is their big title. They're the Praetorian Guard, and they're a big deal. Yeah, tell us about it.
Huge deal. I mean, they're the mafia, in my opinion. I don't know. The more I've been reading about them, the more I realize they control Rome. They're really the kingmakers.
Oh, yeah, man. It's a big deal.
Yeah, so one story I read is there was a guy named Caligula, and he was in charge. He was the third Roman emperor, and he started going bad. He started taking away powers from the senators and from Rome. And so the Praetorian Guard said, you're out. and they killed him, assassinated him.
Yeah.
And in his place, they put a guy named Claudius who was deaf and sickly, and who wasn't a threat, and they put him in charge. And they said, "You're going to be the emperor of Rome now, and we're going to tell you what to do."
Your comparison to the mafia is pretty interesting because it is in Italy.
I mean, I don't.
Or it,
Whoa, yeah,
in Italy.
I didn't mean to go
so,
like.
yeah, right. But I mean, there's something to it
That's
in
true.
the sense that, like, I mean, it is this organized, and they're super powerful, and it's a big deal. And there's a lot of people that would jockey just to get 10 minutes with one of these guys.
Yeah.
Right? Like, I would just like a few minutes to bend your ear about something I want done or something I need because these guys had the power to make it happen.
Yeah.
Right? So here's Paul.
The whole imperial guard.
You're right.
Knows he's imprisoned, not for Caesar. He's not in prison for the wrong that he's done to Caesar. He's in prison for Jesus, for Christ.
And he's getting time with either these guys or people that are near these guys, right? And so they're all becoming aware of the gospel. And he sees that this means that all of Rome, a lot of powerful people in Rome, influential people in Rome, are going to be seated with the gospel. Yeah. And he sees none of this would have been possible if I hadn't been here in jail.
Right. And so just the opportunity here, right? His chain becomes gain. It really is this. He's seen opportunities, and we have to do that too. In the midst of your hindrance, because the Greek word there for chain is hindrance, in the midst of your hindrance, where is there an opportunity for you to take a step where you think there might not have been before? What will your new normal be? This is Paul's new normal. I got to teach a life group last night, our family's life group, and we've been going through our sermon-based curriculum here with the Great Reset, and we just talked about, hey, what's changed in your life in the past week that honestly you didn't think would happen to you? But what's a new normal? What's something you might continue doing after this quarantine that you've seen good from? And we took Joseph's story. So right there, Paul is essentially living out Joseph's story, saying, you know, something bad happened to me, but God intended it for good. And this is my new normal. And I just got to appreciate it and live in it and not complain about it.
I think there's something pretty deep here about setting the right goals in life that set you up to not be disappointed. You know, and this is great for you, whether you're an adult or you're thinking about parenting and how you're parenting your kids. You know, if we establish as the goal of my life is to serve Jesus Christ well and to advance the gospel as long as I have breath, like that's a no-fail goal. Like you can accomplish that. God will help you accomplish that. Going back to this thing we talked about yesterday about he who began a good work in you will be faithful to complete it. God's going to help you to accomplish it and to get to the finish line. If our goals are God's goals for our lives, then when crisis happens or difficulties happen or there's monkey wrenches that are thrown into our expectations or plans, we're not crushed because we're aiming for the right thing. You know, but if we set our kids up to say, hey, the thing is you got to become a Major League Baseball player and that's success. And you pour the whole energy of your family and you're helping your kid get to the MLB and he throws out an arm, well then huge discouragement and a sense of, man, I'm just not hitting the mark. I failed my family. I failed my parents. But you establish seeking after Jesus Christ and pursuing him as the goal. And no matter what your circumstances, how things change, what crises come along, you're put in prison, you're still able to succeed and get done beautiful things for God.
And it's inspiring to others. When people see that you're living that way, then it inspires them that maybe they shouldn't live for themselves. They shouldn't be so selfish. Paul says that in verse 14. And most of the brothers, having become confident in the Lord by my imprisonment, are much more bold to speak the word without fear. So your commitment to God and what he considers a good work, not your good work, but his good work of sharing the gospel and being a witness and being a model, it's contagious and it spreads and people want it and they love it. There's a really interesting thing here in the next couple of verses.
Hang on just a second, because I want to pursue this thing right here just a little bit. Because like in my mind, it's almost like, I don't know, you a Braveheart fan? There's been a lot of movie rewatching lately.
That's the only rated R movie I've ever seen.
Is that right? No, that's impressive.
I'm not supposed to. Can't lie.
So, like, there's this moment, right, where he's out there challenging the troops. He's running up and down, and he's saying, we're about to go take this. And Paul says, my imprisonment has been like that. It's encouraged people. It's causing people to step forward who might be not willing to do so before.
That's a good word.
It's really awesome. And connected to the other part, we talked about this slavery idea. I was thinking another history bit about a couple of guys. I pulled up their names because I'm going to mispronounce them. But it's Johann Leonhard Dober and David Nitschmann. They're both Germans. They're Moravians. This is this really significant group in Europe in the 14th and 15th century, 16th century, who were really sincere about their faith. They were great prayer warriors, and they got serious about making the gospel the most important thing. And so they wanted to go to the Caribbean to preach the gospel, which at that time wasn't so luxurious.
Okay, all right.
Right? And so St. Croix and St. John and, all those islands that were there. And the thing about it is you couldn't go there unless you were either working for the company that ran it or you were a slave.
Oh.
And so these guys said, like, they were trying to get there. They believed God wanted to preach the gospel in this location. They couldn't get there. And so the two of them stepped forward and they told the government, we're willing to sell ourselves into slavery in order to go and to be able to be there among the slaves that are there, because we believe so passionately that this ought to take place. And so they tried that angle, and the government said, no, you can't do it because your skin's white. Like, honestly, denied them the right to become slaves because their skin was the wrong color. Crazy. And but eventually they stayed after it, and their passion for it impresses the monarchy so much that they make a way for them to go. But man, an inspiring story. 13,000 people accept Christ as they show up and begin to preach the gospel in the islands because of their dedication. But there was something so inspiring that other missionaries would come and they would follow, because these guys are like, we're willing to become slaves, literally, for Christ. And this has been Paul's spirit. It's what gets him into jail in the first place. Everybody knows it, and then they're really inspired to continue to proclaim the gospel because Paul's been faithful to it as well.
That's pretty cool.
So I don't know who you're supposed to inspire this week, right?
Yeah.
Maybe somebody by your faith and your commitment to Jesus in the face of the crisis that we're in.
And you never know who you're going to reach. I mean, we've talked just within this quarantine. Well, I've heard names like we've been able to talk to John Cornyn's office, and we've been able to talk to the governor, and in these different areas where all these authorities are, getting touch points with churches and people who want to share their faith. And just you never know where this goes. You never know where the gospel will spread because of a quarantine. Yeah, do we have time to do these last couple verses, or what do you think?
Let's do it.
Okay, this is really interesting because he's talking about how bold he is, but this is a curveball of all curveballs. He says in verse 15, some indeed preach Christ from envy and rivalry, but others from goodwill. The latter do it out of love, knowing that I am put here for the defense of the gospel. The former proclaimed Christ out of selfish ambition, not sincerely, but thinking to afflict me in my imprisonment. What then? Only that in every way, whether in pretense or in truth, Christ is proclaimed, and in that I rejoice. So I don't know, what do you take from this? Because it's hard to read that there are preachers preaching out of selfish ambition and envy, and yet still Paul sees it as a win. He sees it as God can do it. God can use that.
Yeah, well, first of all, it's just about the power of the gospel, right? That in and of itself, there's something powerful. I mean, when you were growing up, you probably heard somebody say, God finds a way to hit straight licks with broken sticks.
Okay.
Or crooked sticks. You ever heard that before?
Right now.
Okay, right. God has a way of hitting straight hits with crooked sticks, and I think I completely messed that up. You should make a message.
Let's edit that out.
Let me know what that actually is. But this idea that the gospel of itself is powerful, and God uses sinful, broken people to pronounce the gospel, and that's true for you and me and everybody that's ever preached the gospel.
Sure.
So sure, some of these guys had clearly evil motives, but there's nobody that's ever preached that had 100% pure motives. Right? We all are trying to get over our ego and our sinfulness and our brokenness. And so Paul sees that maybe in these people it's more egregious. But I think there is this core idea. You don't have to be perfect or have it all worked out for God to use you to present the gospel in ways powerful.
I think that's what stands out to me is that when I first read this, I thought, man, these people are the worst. They're probably just trying to grow their own congregations, or now that Paul's in prison, that the glory, the anointed one is in prison, that they give a chance to grow their church. But then I thought, well, that gives me hope because I know I have flaws. And if he says, hey, God's going to bless that with their flaws, then I think it should encourage you that no matter where you're at in your faith, even if you feel like I can't do anything good for God right now, well, apparently you can. Apparently God can still use the gospel through you to make a big impact around the people and the people around you and in their lives.
Yeah, that's really great. Well, we're glad that you've been here today. We'll look forward to seeing you at the same time tomorrow. Have a fantastic morning and afternoon. And we'll see you soon.